The birthday cake sat untouched on the kitchen counter, its 25 pink candles now cold wax pooled around unlit wicks. I stared at it through the window of my small apartment, watching the shadows grow longer as evening approached. Just 12 hours ago, I had been so excited about surprising Emma with her favorite chocolate raspberry cake, the same one I'd made for her every birthday since she was 3 years old. Now, her words echoed in my mind like a broken record that wouldn't stop playing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. You're such a burden, Mom. I can't deal with this anymore. Those words had cut deeper than any physical pain I'd ever endured, and at 62, I'd endured plenty. They came after I'd called to wish her happy birthday, after I'd spent 3 days preparing her favorite meal, after I'd carefully wrapped the vintage jewelry box I'd found at an estate sale that reminded me of the one she'd admired in my grandmother's room as a child. The same daughter who used to climb into my lap when she had nightmares, who used to call me her best friend, who used to say she wanted to be just like me when she grew up. My name is Margaret Walsh, though everyone used to call me Maggie. These days, I'm not sure anyone calls me anything at all. I've lived in the small town of Millbrook for my entire 62 years, watching it transform from a close-knit community where everyone knew their neighbors to a place where people rush past each other without making eye contact. My husband, David, passed away 3 years ago from a sudden heart attack, leaving me alone in the house where we'd raised Emma and her older brother Thomas. Thomas lives in Seattle now with his wife and 2 children. He calls every Sunday like clockwork, sends photos of the grandchildren I rarely see, and always asks if I need anything. But it's different with Emma. She's always been my baby, my little girl who needed me more than Thomas ever did. When David died, I thought Emma and I would grow closer. Instead, something shifted between us, a distance that seemed to widen with each passing month. The morning of Emma's 25th birthday started like any other. I woke at sunrise, made my coffee, and sat on the small balcony of my 1-bedroom apartment overlooking Main Street. I'd moved here 6 months ago after selling the family house. Emma had insisted it was too big for me, too expensive to maintain, too full of memories that were holding me back from moving forward. She'd helped me find this place, a cozy apartment above Henderson's bookstore, and assured me it was perfect for starting fresh. I spent the morning preparing Emma's birthday dinner, the same menu I'd made for her every year: herb-crusted salmon, garlic mashed potatoes, and green beans almondine. The chocolate raspberry cake had taken me most of the afternoon, carefully layering the sponge with fresh raspberries and chocolate ganache, just the way she loved it. I'd even bought new candles, the kind that couldn't be blown out easily, thinking we'd laugh together as she tried to extinguish them. At exactly 6 o'clock, I called Emma's number. She lived just 20 minutes away in the newer part of town, in a modern townhouse with sleek furniture and minimalist decor that never felt warm to me. The phone rang 4 times before she answered, and I could hear voices in the background, laughter and music. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice already carrying that tone of impatience I'd grown accustomed to hearing whenever we spoke. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said, trying to inject enthusiasm into my voice. "I have dinner ready for you whenever you'd like to come over. I made all your favorites, and I found the most beautiful jewelry box at Mrs. Patterson's estate sale. It has a little ballerina that spins when you open it, just like the one at Grandma's house that you used to love." There was a pause, and I could hear someone in the background saying something about shots and getting the party started. "Mom, I can't tonight. I'm having people over. I told you about this." I felt my heart sink. "You did? I don't remember you mentioning anything about a party." "I definitely told you," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Look, maybe we can do something next week. I'm really busy right now." "But it's your birthday," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. "I've been cooking all day. I made your cake." "Mom, please don't guilt-trip me. I'm 25 years old. I don't need my mommy making me birthday cake anymore. The words stung, but I pressed on. I just thought we could spend some time together. It's been weeks since I've seen you. That's because every time we get together, you make me feel guilty about something. About not visiting enough. About not calling. Enough about moving on with my life while you're stuck in the past. Emma, that's not fair. I've never said anything like that. You don't have to say it, Mom. It's written all over your face every time you look at me. You want me to be your whole world, and I can't be that for you. It's too much pressure. I could hear more laughter in the background. Young voices celebrating, living their lives without the weight of someone else's loneliness pressing down on them. I just miss you, I whispered. I miss my daughter. And there it is, Emma said, her voice sharp now. The guilt, the manipulation. Do you know how exhausting it is to be your only source of happiness? You're such a burden, Mom. I can't deal with this anymore. I need space. I need you to stop calling me every day and stop expecting me to fill the hole that Dad left behind. The line went quiet, except for the sound of my own breathing. I felt like I'd been slapped, the words hitting me with such force that I actually took a step backward. Emma, I never meant to. I have to go. My friends are here. We'll talk later. The line went dead, and I stood in my small kitchen holding the phone, staring at the elaborate birthday dinner I'd prepared for no one. The silence in my apartment was deafening, broken only by the tick of the clock on the wall and the distant sounds of traffic on Main Street below. I sank into my kitchen chair and stared at the untouched meal. Emma's words replayed in my mind over and over. A burden. That's what I'd become to my own daughter. The woman who had given birth to her, who had stayed up countless nights when she was sick, who had cheered at every soccer game and school play, who had held her when her first boyfriend broke her heart. I was now nothing more than an obligation she resented. For the first time since David's death, I cried real tears. Not the gentle weeping I'd done at his funeral, but deep body-shaking sobs that came from a place of such profound loneliness that I wondered if I'd ever feel whole again. I grieved not just for my husband, but for the relationship with my daughter that seemed to have died along with him. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed listening to the sounds of the town settling into evening, thinking about Emma's words and wondering where I'd gone wrong. Had I really been as clingy and demanding as she claimed? I thought about our recent conversations, trying to see them through her eyes. Maybe I did call too often. Maybe I did expect too much from her. Maybe the problem wasn't that she'd changed, but that I had become someone I didn't recognize. The next morning, I made a decision. If Emma needed space, I would give it to her. I wouldn't call, wouldn't text, wouldn't show up uninvited with homemade meals or thoughtful gifts. I would prove to her that I wasn't the needy, burdensome mother she believed me to be. I would show her that I had a life of my own, that I didn't need her constant presence to be happy. But as the days turned into weeks, the silence between us grew heavier. I threw myself into activities, volunteering at the local library, taking a watercolor painting class at the community center, even joining a book club with other women my age. I kept myself busy from morning until night, determined to build a life that didn't revolve around my children. Yet despite my efforts, Emma's absence left a gaping hole in my daily routine. I found myself reaching for the phone to call her when something interesting happened, only to remember her words and put it back down. I'd see something at the store that she'd like and have to force myself to walk past it. Every evening at 6 o'clock, the time I used to call her, I felt a physical ache in my chest. 3 weeks passed without any contact between us. I began to wonder if this was how it would be from now on, if the natural progression of a mother-daughter relationship was for the daughter to simply outgrow the need for her mother entirely. Thomas called during his usual Sunday check-in, mentioning that he'd spoken to Emma and she seemed to be doing well, busy with work and her social life. He didn't mention me, and I didn't ask. It was during my 4th week of voluntary exile from Emma's life that I received a phone call that would change everything. I was watering the plants on my balcony when my phone rang, showing a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Walsh? This is Detective Lisa Chen with the Millbrook Police Department. I was wondering if you could come down to the station to answer some questions about your daughter Emma. My blood ran cold. Is she hurt? Has something happened to her? She's not hurt, ma'am, but there's been an incident we need to discuss with you. How soon can you be here? I threw on the first clothes I could find and drove to the police station with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Emma might have called me a burden, she might have wanted space, but she was still my daughter. Whatever trouble she was in, whatever had happened, I would be there for her. Detective Chen was a small woman with kind eyes and a serious expression. She led me to a small interview room and offered me coffee, which I declined, my stomach already churning with anxiety. Mrs. Walsh, your daughter Emma has been arrested on charges of embezzlement from her employer, Hartwell Financial Group. The amount involved is substantial, over $200,000. I felt the room spin around me. That's impossible. Emma would never steal money. There's been some mistake. I understand this is shocking, Detective Chen said gently. The evidence is quite clear, however. Security cameras, bank records, witness testimony from colleagues who noticed irregularities in the accounts she managed. But why? Emma has a good job, a nice home. She doesn't need money. Detective Chen consulted her notes. According to our investigation, your daughter has been maintaining a lifestyle well beyond her means. The townhouse she lives in, the car she drives, the frequent trips and expensive purchases, all of it was being funded by money systematically stolen from client accounts. I thought about Emma's modern townhouse with its expensive furniture, her designer clothes, the vacation photos she posted on social media from places I could never afford to visit. I'd always been proud of how successful she seemed, how well she was doing for someone so young. We've also discovered that she's been involved with a man named Marcus Reed, Detective Chen continued. He has a history of financial fraud and may have influenced her decisions. We believe he's been coaching her on how to manipulate the accounting system at her firm. I don't understand. Emma never mentioned anyone named Marcus. She told me she was focusing on her career, that she didn't have time for serious relationships. According to her colleagues, she's been quite secretive about this relationship. They've been living together for several months, though she kept her own place to maintain appearances. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process this information. My daughter, who had called me a burden just weeks ago, had been living a double life funded by stolen money. The successful, independent woman I'd been so proud of was a criminal. Mrs. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Walsh, I need to ask you some questions about your relationship with Emma. When was the last time you spoke with her? I told Detective Chen about our conversation on Emma's birthday, about the hurtful things she'd said, about the weeks of silence that followed. As I spoke, I began to see our relationship differently. Emma's impatience with me, her insistence that I was too involved in her life, her reluctance to spend time together, it all made sense now. She hadn't been pulling away because she was growing up. She'd been pulling away because she was hiding something. Has Emma ever asked you for money? Detective Chen asked. No, never. In fact, she often insisted on paying when we went out to dinner. She said she was doing well financially and wanted to treat me. Did she ever show unusual interest in your finances? Ask about your savings, your investments, anything like that? I thought carefully. Not directly, but after David, my husband, passed away. She was very involved in helping me settle his affairs. She helped me find a financial advisor, suggested I sell the house and downsize. She said I needed to be smart about managing my money for my future. Detective Chen made notes, her expression thoughtful. What was the name of the financial advisor she recommended? Martin Hartwell. He works for the same company Emma does, Hartwell Financial Group. Detective Chen's pen stopped moving. She looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Mrs. Walsh, Martin Hartwell, is Emma's supervisor. He's also the one who discovered the missing money and reported it to the police. A chill ran down my spine. What are you saying? I'm saying we need to look very carefully at the advice Emma gave you about your finances. We need to examine whether her involvement in your financial decisions was purely helpful or if there was another motive. That afternoon, I found myself sitting across from Martin Hartwell in his corner office at Hartwell Financial Group. He was a distinguished man in his 50s with silver hair and an expensive suit, the kind of person who inspired confidence in financial matters. When Emma had introduced us 2 years ago, I'd been impressed by his knowledge and his patient way of explaining complex investment strategies. Mrs. Walsh, I'm so sorry you have to go through this, he said, his voice filled with what seemed like genuine sympathy. Emma's actions have shocked all of us. She was one of our most trusted employees. Mr. Hartwell, Detective Chen asked me to review my accounts with you. She seemed to think there might be some connection between Emma's situation and my finances. His expression grew serious. I've been reviewing your portfolio since Emma's arrest, and I'm afraid there are some irregularities I need to discuss with you. He turned his computer screen toward me, showing a series of transactions I didn't recognize. These are transfers from your accounts that occurred over the past 18 months. Small amounts at first, but increasing in frequency and size over time. I stared at the screen, not understanding what I was seeing. I don't remember authorizing these transfers. That's because you didn't, he said gently. Emma had access to your accounts as your designated financial power of attorney. She could make transactions on your behalf without your direct authorization for each one. The room felt like it was closing in on me. How much money are we talking about? Approximately $85,000. I felt my breath leave my body. $85,000 was nearly half of the money David had left me, the nest egg that was supposed to last me through my retirement years. But the financial power of attorney was only supposed to be for emergencies, I said weakly. Emma said it was just a precaution in case something happened to me and she needed to handle my affairs. Unfortunately, the document you signed gives her broad authority over your financial decisions. Emma used that authority to systematically transfer money from your accounts into ones she controlled. I thought about all the times Emma had discouraged me from looking too closely at my financial statements, telling me not to worry about the details, that she and Mr. Hartwell were taking care of everything. I thought about her insistence that I sell the family house, that I downsize to a smaller apartment, that I be more careful with my spending. All the while, she was stealing from me. Mrs. Walsh, there's something else you need to know, Mr. Hartwell continued. The money Emma stole from you was just the beginning. She used your social security number and personal information to open credit cards in your name. She's accumulated approximately $30,000 in debt that legally belongs to you. I stared at him in shock. Credit cards? But I don't have any credit cards except the one I've had for years. She was careful to have the statements sent to a P.O. box so you wouldn't see them. But when she's prosecuted, those debts will come to light. Unless we can prove that you were a victim of identity theft, you could be held responsible for paying them. The full scope of Emma's betrayal began to dawn on me. She hadn't just stolen my money. She had stolen my identity, my credit, my financial future. And she had done it all while convincing me that I was the problem in our relationship, that I was the burden she needed to escape from. Why would she do this? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Based on what we've discovered about her relationship with Marcus Reed, I believe she was being manipulated. He has a pattern of targeting women in financial positions, convincing them to steal money for him. But Mrs. Walsh, that doesn't excuse what Emma did to you. She made deliberate choices to betray your trust and steal from you. I left Mr. Hartwell's office feeling like I was walking through a nightmare. Everything I thought I knew about my daughter, about our relationship, about my own life, had been turned upside down. The woman who had called me a burden had been systematically destroying my financial security while pretending to help me. That evening, I sat in my small apartment looking at the birthday cake I'd made for Emma, now moldy and inedible, sitting where I'd left it on the counter. I thought about all the signs I'd missed, all the times I'd felt grateful that Emma was looking out for my interests, all the moments when I'd blamed myself for being too needy, too dependent on her. The phone rang, and I saw Emma's name on the screen. For a moment, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let her sit in jail and think about what she'd done. But another part of me, the part that would always be her mother, needed to hear her voice. "Mom?" Her voice was small and scared, nothing like the confident, impatient tone she'd used on her birthday. "Yes, Emma? I'm here." "Mom, I'm so sorry. I know you must hate me. I know you must never want to see me again." I closed my eyes, feeling tears I thought I'd exhausted start to fall again. "I don't hate you, Emma. I'm heartbroken and confused and angry, but I don't hate you. I never meant for it to go this far. It started small, just a little money here and there. Marcus said it wasn't really stealing because you were my mother and you'd want to help me if you knew I needed it. But I would have helped you, Emma. If you needed money, if you were in trouble, all you had to do was ask." "I know," she whispered, and I could hear her crying. But I was in so deep, and Marcus said if I told you the truth, you'd never forgive me. He said the only way to fix it was to take a little more, just enough to pay back what we'd borrowed, and then we'd stop. "Emma, you stole over $100,000 from me. You took out credit cards in my name. This isn't borrowing. This is fraud." I know how bad it is. Marcus is gone, Mom. As soon as I got arrested, he disappeared. I think he was using me the whole time." I felt a familiar surge of protective instincts, even in the face of everything Emma had done to me. My daughter had been manipulated and used, and now she was alone and facing the consequences of decisions that had been influenced by someone who never cared about her. "Emma, you need to tell the police everything about Marcus. If he was manipulating you, if he was pressuring you to steal, that might help your case." "Mom, why are you helping me? After everything I've done to you, after all the terrible things I said, why aren't you hanging up on me?" I looked around my small apartment, at the life I'd built after David's death, at the independence I'd tried so hard to maintain. I thought about Emma calling me a burden, about the weeks of silence between us, about all the ways our relationship had fractured over the past few years. "Because you're my daughter," I said simply. "And despite everything that's happened, despite all the hurt and betrayal that will never change." Over the next few days, I found myself in a strange position. The daughter who had pushed me away, who had called me a burden and demanded space, now needed me more than she ever had before. Emma was facing serious criminal charges, potential prison time, and the complete destruction of the life she'd tried to build. The man she thought loved her had abandoned her the moment things got difficult, leaving her to face the consequences alone. I hired a lawyer for Emma, using money from the small amount of savings she hadn't stolen. I visited her in jail, bringing books and writing materials, sitting across from her in the sterile visiting room and trying to understand how we'd gotten to this point. I listened as she told me about Marcus, about how charming and convincing he'd been, about how he'd gradually convinced her that taking money from my accounts wasn't really stealing because I had more than I needed, and she was just borrowing against her future inheritance. "He made it sound so reasonable," Emma said during one of our visits. "He said older people like you didn't understand modern financial strategies, that we were actually helping you by investing your money in better opportunities." "But Emma, you had to know it was wrong. You had to know that taking money without asking, hiding it from me, lying about your financial situation, all of that was wrong. Emma's face crumpled. I did know. Deep down, I knew it was wrong. But I was so scared of losing him, and I was so deep in debt, and he kept saying that if I just trusted him, everything would work out. And then when Dad died and you were so sad all the time, I told myself that at least you didn't have to worry about money because I was taking care of everything. Taking care of everything by stealing from me? I know how it sounds. I know how crazy it sounds. But Marcus said that families were supposed to help each other, that your money would be mine someday anyway, that we were just accessing it a little early. I studied my daughter's face, seeing for the first time the desperation and fear that must have been hiding behind her confident facade for months. She looked younger than her 25 years, more like the scared little girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. Emma, why didn't you come to me when you first got in trouble? Why didn't you tell me about Marcus, about the debt, about any of it? Because I knew you'd be disappointed in me. I knew you'd think I was making bad choices, and I couldn't stand the thought of you looking at me the way you're looking at me now. How am I looking at you? Like you don't recognize me anymore? Like I'm a stranger? I reached across the table and took her hands in mine. They were cold and trembling, and for a moment she felt like my little girl again. Emma, you are a stranger to me right now. The daughter I raised would never have stolen from anyone, let alone from her own mother. The daughter I raised would have come to me if she was in trouble. The daughter I raised wouldn't have called me a burden and pushed me away just so she could steal from me more easily. Emma's tears fell freely now. I know I'm not the person you raised me to be. I don't even know how I became this person. You became this person by making choices, Emma. Every time you took money from my accounts, every time you lied to me about your finances, every time you pushed me away so I wouldn't ask too many questions, you chose to become someone different. Can I ever be your daughter again? Can you ever forgive me for this? I looked at this young woman who had caused me so much pain, who had betrayed my trust in the deepest way possible, who had stolen not just my money, but my sense of security and independence. I thought about the weeks of silence between us, about her cruel words on her birthday, about all the ways she had made me feel like a burden when she was the one who was stealing from me. But I also thought about the little girl who used to beg me to read her one more bedtime story, who used to pick wildflowers for me from the side of the road, who used to tell me she loved me every single day without fail. That little girl was still somewhere inside this troubled young woman, buried under bad choices and manipulation and fear. You'll always be my daughter, Emma. But forgiveness isn't something that happens overnight. You didn't just steal my money. You stole my trust. You made me question everything about our relationship, everything about myself as a mother. That kind of betrayal doesn't heal quickly. What can I do? How can I make this right? You can start by taking responsibility for your choices. Not just the stealing, but the lying, the manipulation, the way you treated me. You can stop blaming Marcus for everything and admit that you chose to betray me. I do take responsibility. I know it was my choice. Do you? Because when you called me a burden on your birthday, when you told me I was too needy and demanding, you were stealing from me. You were making me feel guilty for wanting a relationship with my daughter while you were systematically robbing me. Do you take responsibility for that? Emma was quiet for a long moment. I was angry that day because I'd just found out that Marcus had been lying to me about something, and I took it out on you. I said those things because I wanted to hurt you the way I was hurting. You said those things because it was easier to make me the villain in our relationship than to admit what you were doing. It was easier to push me away and make me feel like the problem than to face the truth about your choices. You're right. You're absolutely right. And I'm so sorry. As I drove home from the jail that day, I thought about the conversation and the long road ahead of us. Emma would likely serve prison time, even with a good lawyer and a plea agreement. Her career in finance was over, her credit destroyed, her future uncertain. The money she'd stolen from me would take years to recover, if it ever could be recovered at all. But perhaps most importantly, our relationship would never be the same. The trust between us had been shattered, and trust, once broken, is one of the hardest things to rebuild. I would continue to visit Emma, to support her through her legal troubles, to be her mother in whatever way I could. But I would never again let her have access to my finances, never again take her advice without verifying it independently, never again allow myself to feel guilty for setting boundaries. Emma had called me a burden, but in the end, she had become the burden. She had burdened me with debt I didn't create, with legal problems I didn't cause, with the heartbreak of watching my child destroy herself. She had given me a real burden, far heavier than anything she had accused me of placing on her. Yet somehow, despite everything, I still loved her. Not the way I used to, with blind trust and unconditional acceptance, but with the complicated love of a mother who has to learn to love her child while protecting herself from further harm. It was a love tempered by wisdom, strengthened by boundaries, and deepened by the knowledge that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive behavior. The months ahead would be difficult. There would be court dates and lawyers' meetings, financial recovery efforts and family therapy sessions. There would be awkward conversations with friends and neighbors, difficult questions from Thomas and his family, the challenge of rebuilding a life that had been turned upside down by betrayal. But for the first time since David's death, I felt like I knew exactly who I was. I was not a burden. I was not too needy or too demanding or too anything. I was a mother who had loved her daughter so much that I had missed the signs of her betrayal. I was a woman who had trusted too easily and paid a heavy price for that trust. I was someone who had been knocked down but was determined to get back up. As I pulled into the parking space behind my apartment building, I made a decision. I would not let Emma's choices define the rest of my life. I would recover from this betrayal, financially and emotionally. I would rebuild my sense of security and independence. And I would continue to be Emma's mother, but on my terms, with my boundaries, in a way that protected both of us from further harm. The burden Emma had given me was heavy, but I was strong enough to carry it. And unlike the burden she had accused me of being, this one would eventually get lighter with time, effort, and healing. Some burdens break us, but others teach us just how much strength we really have. I had learned that I had more strength than I ever imagined possible, and perhaps in time, Emma would learn that lesson too. 3 weeks after Emma's arrest, I received a phone call that would shatter what little remained of my faith in human nature. The voice on the other end belonged to Detective Chen, but her tone was different this time, more urgent and concerned. "Mrs. Walsh, we need you to come to the station immediately. There's been a development in Emma's case that you need to know about." "What kind of development?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to hear the answer. Every revelation about Emma's double life had been worse than the last. "I'd rather discuss this in person. Can you be here within the hour?" I arrived at the police station with my hands trembling and my mind racing through possibilities, each more terrible than the last. Detective Chen met me at the entrance and guided me to the same interview room where we'd first discussed Emma's crimes. "Mrs. Walsh, please sit down," she said gently. "What I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear." I gripped the arms of my chair, bracing myself for whatever new horror Emma had committed. "We've been investigating Marcus Reed, the man Emma was involved with. What we've discovered is that this isn't his first time manipulating women into committing financial crimes for him." "How many others?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. 7 that we've identified so far, spanning the last 5 years. All women in their 20s, all working in financial institutions, all convinced to steal money for him using similar tactics." I felt sick to my stomach. Emma hadn't been special to Marcus. She hadn't been loved or cherished. She'd been a mark, a target, just another victim in a pattern of predatory behavior. But there's more, Mrs. Walsh, and this is the part that's going to be hardest to hear. Marcus Reed isn't just a con artist. He's also Emma's half-brother. The room spun around me. That's impossible. Emma doesn't have a half-brother. David never had other children. Detective Chen slid a folder across the table. Marcus Reed's real name is Michael Davidson. His mother is Patricia Davidson, a woman your husband had an affair with 26 years ago. I opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were documents, photographs, DNA test results. There was a picture of a young woman with dark hair and familiar eyes, holding a baby. The woman looked nothing like anyone I knew, but the baby's features were unmistakably similar to David's. David had an affair, I whispered, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. After 39 years of marriage, I thought I knew everything about my husband. According to Patricia Davidson, the affair lasted 6 months. When she told your husband she was pregnant, he ended the relationship and refused to acknowledge the child. She raised Marcus alone, telling him stories about his father who had abandoned them for his legitimate family. I stared at the documents, trying to process this information. David, my faithful husband who had never given me reason to doubt his loyalty, had cheated on me and fathered a child he'd never acknowledged. Mrs. Walsh, are you all right? Do you need some water? I nodded, and Detective Chen stepped out to get me a glass. I sat alone with the folder, looking at pictures of a child who shared David's nose and chin, who had grown up knowing his father had chosen another family over him. When Detective Chen returned, I had composed myself enough to ask the obvious question. Does Emma know? Does she know that Marcus is her half-brother? We don't believe so. Marcus has been using the name Reed for years, and there's no indication that Emma ever connected him to your husband. We think Marcus deliberately sought her out, knowing who she was, planning to use her connection to your family. The full scope of Marcus's manipulation began to dawn on me. He hadn't randomly met Emma and decided to use her. He had specifically targeted her because she was David's daughter, because he wanted revenge against the family that had everything he'd been denied. So Emma was seduced by her own half-brother? She was in a relationship with him? According to Marcus's previous victims, he's very skilled at maintaining emotional distance while making women believe they're in love with him. We don't believe the relationship was ever truly romantic, despite what Emma may have thought. I thought about Emma's secretiveness about Marcus, her reluctance to introduce him to me or talk about their relationship in detail. Had she sensed something was wrong, or had Marcus simply been careful to keep their interactions private? Detective Chen, how long had Marcus been planning this? How long was he watching our family? Based on what we've pieced together, at least 2 years. He researched your family extensively, learned about Emma's job, your financial situation, David's death. He knew exactly how to position himself to gain Emma's trust and access to your money. The betrayal felt layered now, like discovering that an earthquake had been preceded by years of small tremors you'd never noticed. Not only had Emma stolen from me, but she'd been manipulated by a man who had targeted our family for revenge against his dead father. There's more, Mrs. Walsh. We found journals in Marcus's apartment, detailed plans not just for stealing money, but for destroying your family entirely. He wanted to bankrupt you, ruin Emma's life, and disappear with enough money to start over somewhere else. What kind of plans? Detective Chen hesitated. He was planning to manipulate Emma into convincing you to take out a reverse mortgage on your house before you sold it, giving him access to even more of your money. He also had plans to have Emma forge your signature on documents that would have made him your financial power of attorney. I felt a chill run down my spine. If Emma hadn't been caught when she was, Marcus could have taken everything I had, left me completely destitute and alone. He also had backup plans, Detective Chen continued. If the financial manipulation hadn't worked quickly enough, he was prepared to escalate. Escalate how? Mrs. Walsh, we found detailed notes about your daily routines, your medical history, your prescriptions. Marcus had been planning what would look like accidents or natural causes. The implication hit me like a physical blow. Marcus hadn't just wanted to steal from me. He'd been prepared to kill me if necessary. Detective Chen, where is Emma Wright? Now? Is she safe? She's still in county jail awaiting trial. She's been placed in protective custody since we discovered Marcus's true identity. We're concerned that he might try to eliminate her as a witness. I left the police station feeling like I was living in someone else's nightmare. The daughter who had called me a burden had been manipulated by a man who wanted to murder me. The husband I'd mourned for 3 years had betrayed me decades ago, and his illegitimate son had returned to destroy everything David and I had built together. That evening, I sat in my apartment surrounded by photographs of my life with David and the children. I studied his face in our wedding pictures, vacation photos, family Christmas mornings, looking for signs of deception I'd missed. Had there been clues? Unexplained absences? Mysterious phone calls? Changes in his behavior I'd dismissed or forgotten? I remembered 1998, the year Marcus would have been conceived. David had been working long hours, traveling more for business, coming home tired and distracted. I'd attributed it to stress from expanding our company, never imagining he was building a relationship with another woman. The affair would have happened during one of the most challenging periods of our marriage. Emma had been going through a difficult phase as a toddler. Thomas was struggling in school, and I'd been overwhelmed trying to manage the household while helping David with the business. We'd been distant with each other, ships passing in the night, focused on our individual responsibilities rather than our relationship. But even understanding the circumstances, I couldn't reconcile the David I'd known with a man who would abandon a pregnant woman and refuse to acknowledge his child. The David I'd married was responsible, caring, someone who took his obligations seriously. Yet the evidence was undeniable. DNA didn't lie. I called Thomas that evening, something I'd been dreading since Emma's arrest. He deserved to know what was happening to his sister, but I'd been protecting him from the worst details, not wanting to burden him with problems he couldn't solve from across the country. "Mom, you sound terrible. What's going on?" I told him. Everything. Emma's arrest, the stolen money, the credit cards in my name, and now the revelation about Marcus being his half-brother. Thomas listened in stunned silence, occasionally asking questions but mostly just absorbing the enormity of what I was telling him. "Mom, I'm catching the next flight out. You shouldn't be dealing with this alone." "Thomas, you have your family, your job. I can handle this." "No, you can't, and you shouldn't have to. Emma is my sister, and if Dad had another son, then he's my half-brother too. This affects all of us." "But what about your children? What about Sarah?" Sarah was Thomas's wife, a kind woman who'd always treated me with warmth and respect. "Sarah understands. She thinks you've been handling this alone for too long already." "Mom, why didn't you call me when Emma was first arrested?" I thought about Emma's words on her birthday, about being a burden, about being too needy and demanding. I didn't want to worry you unnecessarily. I thought I could manage it. "Mom, you're not managing it. You're surviving it. There's a difference." Thomas arrived 2 days later, and I was struck by how much he looked like David. At 32, he had his father's steady presence and practical approach to problems. He hugged me at the airport with the fierce protectiveness I remembered from his childhood, when he'd appointed himself my defender against everything from thunderstorms to difficult customers at our family business. "Let me see the financial records," he said as soon as we got back to my apartment. "I want to understand exactly what Emma did and what Marcus was planning." We spread the documents across my kitchen table, and Thomas went through them with the methodical attention to detail he'd inherited from David. His face grew darker as he absorbed the scope of the theft and manipulation. Mom, this is worse than I thought. Emma didn't just steal money from you, she systematically undermined your entire financial foundation. I know. Mr. Hartwell explained that the credit cards alone will take years to pay off. It's not just the credit cards. Look at this. Thomas pointed to a series of transactions I hadn't understood. Emma changed the beneficiaries on your life insurance policies. Instead of the policies paying out to your children, they would have paid to a trust controlled by Marcus. I felt the blood drain from my face. She changed my life insurance? Without your knowledge or consent, using her power of attorney. Mom, if something had happened to you, Marcus would have collected $500,000. The implications were staggering. Marcus hadn't just been planning to steal my savings and run. He'd been planning to kill me and collect my life insurance money, all while destroying Emma's life in the process. Thomas, does this mean Emma was planning to hurt me too? Thomas studied the documents more carefully. The timing of these changes suggests that Emma might not have known about them. They were all done electronically, using her access credentials but possibly without her direct involvement. Marcus could have done this remotely if he had her login information. But she gave him that access. Yes, she did. Whether she understood what he was planning to do with it is another question. We visited Emma together the next day. Thomas hadn't seen his sister since Christmas, and the change in her appearance was shocking. She'd lost weight, her hair hung limp around her face, and her eyes had a hollow quality that spoke of sleepless nights and constant fear. Thomas? She said when she saw him, her voice barely a whisper. What are you doing here? I'm here because my sister is in jail and my mother has been dealing with this nightmare alone, he said, his voice gentle but firm. Emma's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry, Thomas. I'm so sorry for all of this. Emma, we need to talk about Marcus. We need you to tell us everything you know about him, everything he asked you to do, everything he had access to. I already told Detective Chen everything I could remember. Did you tell her that you gave him your computer passwords? Did you tell her that he had access to your work login credentials? Emma's face went pale. How did you know about that? Because someone used your credentials to change Mom's life insurance beneficiaries, and we don't think it was you. Life insurance? I never touched Mom's life insurance. I wouldn't even know how to access those accounts. Thomas and I exchanged glances. If Emma was telling the truth, then Marcus had been operating beyond what she knew, using her access to commit crimes she wasn't even aware of. Emma, this is important, Thomas continued. Did Marcus ever ask you about Mom's daily routines? Her medical history? Anything that seemed unusual? He asked a lot of questions about our family. I thought he was just interested in getting to know me better. He wanted to know about Dad's death, about Mom's health, about whether she took any medications. What did you tell him? I told him that Mom was healthy but taking blood pressure medication, that she lived alone, that she went to the same grocery store every Tuesday and had coffee with her book club every Thursday. I thought he was just making conversation. I felt sick realizing how much information Emma had innocently provided that could have been used to harm me. Emma, did Marcus ever suggest that you help Mom with more than just her finances? Did he ever talk about becoming more involved in her healthcare decisions? He said I should get Mom to add me to her medical power of attorney in case something happened and she needed someone to make decisions for her. He said it was just being responsible. Thomas and I looked at each other in horror. A medical power of attorney would have given Emma, and by extension Marcus, the ability to make life and death decisions about my health care. Did you ask Mom to sign those papers? Thomas asked. Emma shook her head. I was planning to, but then Marcus disappeared and everything fell apart. Thomas, what was he really planning? Detective Chen said he's not who I thought he was. Thomas took a deep breath. Emma, Marcus Reed is actually Michael Davidson. He's our half-brother. Emma's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, horror, and finally a kind of sickened understanding. Half-brother? But that means he's Dad's son. But Dad never had other children. Yes, he did. Dad had an affair 26 years ago. Marcus was the result. Emma stared at us in silence for a long moment. So Marcus knew who I was when he approached me? He knew we were related? He specifically targeted you because you were Dad's daughter. He's been planning this for years, Emma. You weren't his girlfriend. You were his mark. Emma doubled over as if she'd been punched in the stomach. Oh, God. Oh, God, I thought he loved me. I thought we were building a future together. But he was my brother? Half-brother, Thomas corrected gently. And he never intended to build a future with you. He intended to use you to destroy our family and then disappear. The things we did together, Emma whispered, her face green with nausea. The things I thought were romantic, intimate. He knew we were related the whole time. I reached across the table and took her hand. Despite everything she'd done to me, seeing her pain in that moment broke my heart. She'd been victimized just as surely as I had, manipulated by someone who had exploited both her trust and her desire for love. Emma, I need you to think carefully about everything Marcus had access to. Every password, every account, every piece of information about our family. Detective Chen needs to know all of it. Mom, I gave him everything. Every password, every account number, every detail about your life and Thomas's life and the kids. I thought I was sharing my life with someone who loved me. Over the next several days, Thomas and I worked with Detective Chen and the FBI to piece together the full scope of Marcus's plan. What emerged was a carefully orchestrated scheme to not just steal money, but to completely destroy our family. Marcus had been planning to manipulate Emma into getting me to sign over medical power of attorney, then arrange for what would appear to be a medication error or medical emergency. With me dead and the life insurance policies paying out to his trust, he would have disappeared with over $500,000, leaving Emma to face murder charges. He was setting her up to take the fall for your death, Detective Chen explained during one of our meetings. All the evidence would have pointed to Emma as the beneficiary who manipulated you into changing your policies and then killed you to collect the money. But the policies were changed to his trust, not to Emma. A trust that Emma would have been listed as the administrator of, giving her apparent control over the money. Marcus would have been the true beneficiary, but it would have looked like Emma's scheme. Thomas shook his head in disgust. So he was planning to steal from Mom, kill her, frame Emma for murder, and then disappear with the money while Emma spent the rest of her life in prison. That appears to have been his plan, yes. I thought about Emma calling me a burden on her birthday, about the weeks of silence between us, about how Marcus had probably encouraged her to distance herself from me to make his plan easier to execute. Detective Chen, how close did he come to succeeding? Closer than we like to think about. If Emma hadn't been caught when she was, if the embezzlement from her company hadn't been discovered, Marcus probably would have moved to the next phase of his plan within the next few months. That night, Thomas and I sat in my small apartment talking about our father and trying to understand how the man we'd loved and respected could have made the choices that led to this nightmare. Do you think Mom knew? Thomas asked. About the affair, I mean. I've been going over everything in my mind, and I honestly don't think I did. There were times when your father seemed distant or stressed, but I attributed it to work pressures. I never suspected he was having an affair. And you never met Patricia Davidson? The name doesn't sound familiar? I've never heard that name before Detective Chen mentioned it. Your father must have been very careful to keep that part of his life separate from us. I keep thinking about Marcus growing up knowing he had a father who refused to acknowledge him. No wonder he turned out the way he did. Thomas, that's not an excuse for what he did. Plenty of people grow up in difficult circumstances without becoming predators and murderers. I know, Mom. I'm not excusing him. I'm just trying to understand how we got here. We got here because your father made a selfish choice 26 years ago, and his son inherited his selfishness but not his conscience. The next week, Thomas and I met with a team of lawyers to begin the process of financial recovery and legal protection. The credit cards Marcus had opened in my name could be disputed as identity theft, but it would take months of paperwork and documentation. The money Emma had stolen would be harder to recover, as much of it had already been spent or transferred to accounts that might never be found. Mrs. Walsh, your situation is complicated by the fact that Emma had legitimate power of attorney, one of the lawyers explained. While her actions were clearly criminal, the legal authority she had makes it difficult to reverse some of the transactions. What does that mean for my financial future? It means you'll recover some of what was stolen, but probably not all of it. You'll need to restructure your retirement plans and possibly consider returning to work or finding additional sources of income. I was 62 years old, widowed, and facing the possibility of working again after thinking my financial future was secure. The irony wasn't lost on me that Emma, who had called me a burden, had actually made me dependent on others in ways I'd never expected. But perhaps the most challenging part of our new reality was figuring out how to move forward as a family. Emma would serve prison time, probably several years. Thomas lived across the country with his own family responsibilities. I was starting over financially and emotionally at an age when most people were thinking about slowing down. Mom, Sarah, and I have been talking, Thomas said one evening. We want you to consider moving to Seattle, closer to us. Thomas, I can't uproot my life and follow you around like some helpless elderly relative. That's not what this would be. You could have your own place, your own independence, but you'd be closer to family. And honestly, after everything that's happened, I don't think any of us should be dealing with life's challenges completely alone anymore. I thought about Emma's accusation that I was a burden, about my determination to prove my independence, about the price I'd paid for isolation. Let me think about it, I said. 2 weeks later, I visited Emma one final time before Thomas returned to Seattle. She looked slightly better, having gained back some weight, and found a routine in jail that gave her day structure. Mom, I've been thinking about what I want to say to you before you leave. What's that, sweetheart? I want to tell you about the real burden. The real burden isn't having a mother who loves you and wants to spend time with you. The real burden is knowing that you threw away that love for someone who never cared about you at all. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Emma, you didn't throw away my love. You damaged it. You complicated it. But you didn't destroy it. The real burden is knowing that while I was calling you needy and demanding, you were the only person in my life who actually loved me unconditionally. Marcus never loved me. He was using me from the very beginning. Emma, you're going to have years to think about all of this. What I want you to focus on is not the burden of what you did, but the opportunity to become someone different when you get out. Do you think I can? Do you think I can ever be the daughter you raised me to be? I think you can be even better than that. I think you can be someone who understands the value of authentic relationships, someone who appreciates love that doesn't come with conditions or manipulation. Will you write to me while I'm in prison? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately, to promise her that I'd be there for her no matter what. But another part of me, the part that had learned hard lessons about boundaries and self-protection, knew that I needed to be more careful about my commitments. I'll write to you, Emma, but I won't visit regularly, and I won't put money in your commissary account, and I won't spend my retirement years waiting for you to get out of prison. You need to serve your time and rebuild your life, and I need to do the same. That's fair. That's more than fair, actually. Emma, when you get out, if you want to rebuild our relationship, I'll be open to that. But it will be a new relationship, built on honesty and respect and healthy boundaries. I won't go back to being the mother who enables your poor choices because I'm afraid of losing you. I understand. And Mom, thank you for not giving up on me completely. As I left the jail that day, I realized that Emma had finally given me a real burden. But it wasn't the one she'd intended. The burden wasn't her financial crimes or her betrayal or even her manipulation. The burden was learning to love someone while protecting yourself from them, learning to be a mother while refusing to be a victim, learning to forgive while maintaining boundaries. It was a heavy burden, but it was also a worthy one. Because, in carrying it, I was learning who I really was beneath all the roles I'd played for so many years. I was learning that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, more resilient than I'd given myself credit for, and more capable of starting over than I'd believed possible. The real burden Emma had given me was the burden of growth, of becoming someone new at an age when most people think they're finished becoming anything. It was the burden of wisdom earned through pain, of strength discovered through betrayal, of independence forged through loss. And unlike the burden she'd accused me of being, this burden would make me better, not bitter. This burden would teach me to value authentic relationships over convenient ones, honest love over manipulative attachment, and my own worth over anyone else's approval. Emma had called me a burden and then given me a real one. But in the end, I was strong enough to carry it, wise enough to learn from it, and determined enough to transform it into something that would make the rest of my life more meaningful than anything that had come before. 6 months after Emma's sentencing to 4 years in state prison, I found myself standing in the living room of a small house in Seattle, boxes scattered around me like islands in an ocean of possibility. Thomas had found the place 3 blocks from his family's home, a charming craftsman bungalow with a garden that reminded me of the one David and I had tended together for so many years. "Mom, you don't have to decide right now," Thomas said, watching me examine the built-in bookshelves that lined one wall. "You can rent it month to month until you're sure this is what you want." I ran my fingers along the smooth wood, imagining my books filling these shelves, my photographs finding homes on these surfaces. After months of legal battles and financial recovery, the idea of creating a new space that belonged entirely to me felt both thrilling and terrifying. "I think I'm ready," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "I think it's time to stop looking backward and start building something new." The decision to leave Millbrook hadn't been easy. That small town held every memory. I'd accumulated over 6 decades of life. But it also held the shadows of deception I'd lived with unknowingly for years. Every corner held reminders of Emma's betrayal, David's secret affair, or Marcus's calculated manipulation. Moving to Seattle wasn't running away. It was choosing to write new chapters instead of endlessly rereading painful ones. Sarah, Thomas's wife, had become an unexpected ally in my recovery. She possessed the practical wisdom of someone who had built her own life from scratch, having immigrated from the Philippines as a teenager and worked her way through college while supporting her younger siblings. "Margaret, you're starting over at 63?" she told me one evening as we painted the kitchen walls of my new home a warm yellow that caught the morning light. "Most people your age are afraid to change anything about their lives. But you're choosing to rebuild completely. That takes incredible courage." "Sometimes I wonder if it's courage or just stubborn refusal to be defeated," I replied, carefully cutting around the window frame with my brush. "Does the motivation matter if the result is the same? You're creating a life that belongs to you, not to anyone else's expectations or manipulations." Sarah was right. For the first time in my adult life, I was making decisions based entirely on what I wanted, not on what would make someone else happy or comfortable. The house I'd chosen was smaller than any place I'd lived since my early 20s, but every square foot of it reflected my preferences, my needs, my vision of how I wanted to live. I'd enrolled in a Master Gardener program at the local community college, something I'd always wanted to do, but had never made time for when I was managing a household and helping David with the business. My classmates were a mix of retirees and younger people seeking to change careers, and I found myself energized by their enthusiasm and diverse perspectives. "Mrs. Walsh, your propagation techniques are excellent," Professor Martinez commented during one of our practical sessions. "Have you considered teaching? We're always looking for experienced volunteers to help with community garden projects." The idea of teaching had never occurred to me, but as I worked with struggling students, showing them how to coax life from seemingly dead cuttings, I discovered a patience and skill I didn't know I possessed. Within 2 months, I was leading workshops at the community center, sharing knowledge I'd accumulated through decades of trial and error in my own gardens. Emma wrote to me regularly from prison, long letters that chronicled her daily routine, her participation in educational programs, and her slow process of understanding how thoroughly she'd been manipulated. Her handwriting, which had been shaky and erratic in her first letters, gradually became steady and confident again. "Mom," she wrote in one letter that arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning, "I've been working with a counselor here who specializes in manipulation and abuse. She's helping me understand that what Marcus did to me was a form of psychological abuse, even though I was also perpetrating crimes. I'm learning that being a victim doesn't excuse the choices I made, but understanding how I was manipulated helps me see why I made them." I read her letters carefully, looking for signs of genuine insight versus self-serving justification. The Emma who emerged through her writing was more thoughtful than the young woman who had called me a burden, more aware of the complexity of human relationships and the consequences of betrayal. "I think about that night when I called you a burden," she continued in another letter, "and I realize now that I was projecting my own feelings onto you. I felt like a burden to Marcus, constantly worried that I wasn't doing enough to make him happy, constantly afraid he would leave me if I didn't prove my worth. So when you wanted time with me, when you showed me unconditional love, it felt overwhelming because it highlighted how conditional Marcus's love was." Her insights were painful to read, but also hopeful. The daughter I'd raised to be thoughtful and empathetic was still there, buried under years of poor choices and manipulation, but emerging stronger through honest self-examination. Thomas's children, 8-year-old Sophia and 10-year-old David, named after his grandfather, became unexpected sources of joy in my new life. Without the pressure of being their primary caregiver, I could simply enjoy their company, taking them on garden center expeditions and teaching them to plant seeds and tend growing things. "Grandma Maggie, why do some plants grow in the dark and others need lots of sun?" Sophia asked one afternoon as we transplanted seedlings in my backyard. "Every living thing has different needs," I explained, helping her gentle hands guide a tomato plant into its new pot. "Some plants have learned to thrive in shade because that's where they found their place in the world. Others reach for the sun because that's what makes them strong. Which kind are you?" The question caught me off guard. I looked at this serious little girl with dirt under her fingernails and wisdom in her eyes, and realized she'd asked something I'd been pondering, without knowing it. "I used to think I was a shade plant," I said slowly. "I thought I needed to stay in the background, supporting other people's growth. But I'm learning that I might actually be a sun plant, someone who grows stronger when I have space and light." "I think you're both," Sophia said with the confidence of childhood. "I think you can grow anywhere you decide to." Her words stayed with me as I continued building my new life in Seattle. I joined a book club with women from diverse backgrounds and discovered that my perspectives were valued and interesting to others. I volunteered at a financial literacy program for women recovering from domestic abuse, using my experience with Emma's betrayal to help others recognize and protect themselves from financial manipulation. One evening, about 8 months after moving to Seattle, I received an unexpected phone call. The voice was unfamiliar, belonging to a woman who identified herself as Patricia Davidson. "Mrs. Walsh, I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from Detective Chen. I wanted to speak with you about what my son did to your family." My first instinct was to hang up. I'd worked hard to move past the trauma of Marcus's manipulation, and I wasn't sure I wanted to revisit it by talking to his mother. But something in her voice, a quality of genuine remorse mixed with desperate sadness, made me stay on the line. "What did you want to say, Ms. Davidson?" "I wanted to tell you how sorry I am, and I wanted you to know that the boy who hurt your family isn't the child I raised. Something went wrong along the way, and I've spent every day since his arrest wondering what I could have done differently." I found myself curious about this woman who had shared David's bed and borne his child, who had raised the man who had nearly destroyed my family. "Ms. Davidson, what was your relationship with my husband like?" She was quiet for a long moment. David was charming and attentive, and made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. Until I told him I was pregnant, and then he became someone I didn't recognize. "What did he say when you told him about the baby?" "He said he couldn't leave his family, that he'd made a mistake getting involved with me, and that he would deny the child was his if I ever tried to contact him again. He said his real family would always come first." I felt a familiar ache at learning more details about David's betrayal, but also something unexpected: sympathy for this woman who had been abandoned with a child to raise alone. "Did you ever try to contact him again?" "Once, when Marcus was 5 and needed surgery we couldn't afford. I called David's office and begged him to help us. He had his secretary tell me that if I ever contacted him again, he'd have me arrested for harassment." The David she described was someone I'd never known, someone capable of cruelty I couldn't reconcile with the man who had been gentle with our children, who had cried when our dog died, who had held me through my father's final illness. "Ms. Davidson, what was Marcus like as a child?" "He was bright and curious and so angry. He wanted to know everything about his father, wanted to understand why he wasn't good enough to be loved. I tried to shield him from the worst of it, but children sense when they've been rejected, even when you don't tell them the details." "When did he become dangerous?" "I think it was gradual. He started getting in trouble as a teenager, manipulating teachers and other students, lying about things that didn't matter. I got him counseling, but he was so good at telling people what they wanted to hear that even the therapists couldn't see through him." I thought about Emma's letters, about her slow process of understanding how Marcus had manipulated her psychological vulnerabilities to achieve his goals. "Ms. Davidson, why are you calling me now?" "Because I wanted you to know that what David did, abandoning his son, doesn't excuse what Marcus did to your family. And I wanted to thank you for not giving up on your daughter." "What do you mean?" "Detective Chen told me that you've been supporting Emma through her legal troubles, visiting her, helping her get counseling. Marcus doesn't have anyone doing that for him. Maybe if he had, things would have been different." After we hung up, I sat in my garden as the Seattle evening settled around me, thinking about the complex web of choices and consequences that had led to our current situation. David's betrayal had created Marcus, but Marcus had chosen to become a predator. Emma had chosen to steal from me, but she was also choosing to face her crimes and try to become someone better. I realized that everyone in this story was both victim and perpetrator in different ways. David had been a victim of his own weakness and fear, but he'd victimized Patricia and Marcus with his abandonment. Marcus had been victimized by his father's rejection, but he'd chosen to victimize innocent women in response. Emma had been victimized by Marcus's manipulation, but she'd chosen to victimize me with her theft and emotional cruelty. The only way to break these cycles was to make different choices going forward, to refuse to let past hurts dictate future actions. 2 years after moving to Seattle, I received a letter from Emma that was different from all the others. She was eligible for early release in 6 months and wanted to know if she could come to Seattle to start over near family. Mom, I understand if you say no. I understand if you think I don't deserve a fresh start, or if you're worried about trusting me again. But I'm hoping that maybe we could try to build something new together, something based on honesty and respect, instead of manipulation and guilt. I discussed the request with Thomas and Sarah, both of whom had their own complicated feelings about Emma's potential release. I think you should do whatever feels right for you, Thomas said. You don't owe Emma anything more than you've already given her. But, Sarah added, if you think there's a chance for genuine reconciliation, it might be worth exploring. People can change, especially people who've been forced to confront the consequences of their actions. I thought about Sophia's words about being both a shade plant and a sun plant, about being able to grow anywhere I decided to. I thought about the woman I'd become over the past 3 years, someone stronger and more independent than I'd ever been, someone capable of setting boundaries and maintaining them. I'll agree to let her come here on certain conditions, I told Thomas. She'll need to find her own place to live, her own job, her own support system. I'll help her get started, but I won't become responsible for her success or failure. That sounds reasonable, Mom. And if she falls back into old patterns, if she tries to manipulate or take advantage of anyone in this family, she'll be on her own. When I wrote back to Emma, I outlined these conditions clearly, along with my expectations for how our relationship would work going forward. Emma, if you come to Seattle, it will be to build your own life, not to become part of mine. I'll support your efforts to start over, but I won't rescue you from the consequences of poor choices. Our relationship will be based on mutual respect and healthy boundaries, not on guilt or obligation. Her response came quickly and was shorter than her usual letters. Mom, those terms are more than fair. They're actually what I was hoping for. I don't want to be your burden anymore, and I don't want you to be mine. I want us to be 2 adults who choose to love each other because we want to, not because we have to. 6 months later, I stood in the Seattle airport waiting for Emma's flight to arrive. I felt nervous but not afraid, uncertain but not unprepared. The woman who was coming to Seattle wasn't the same person who had called me a burden 3 years ago, and I wasn't the same woman who had been devastated by those words. Emma emerged from the gate looking older and more serious, her hair shorter, and her clothes simpler than I remembered. She approached me cautiously, as if she wasn't sure how I would react to seeing her. Hi, Mom. Hello, Emma. We hugged briefly, a careful embrace that acknowledged both our connection and our caution. How was the flight? Long, but good. I spent most of it thinking about how different everything is going to be. As we drove through Seattle toward the small apartment Thomas had helped Emma find, she looked out the window at the city that would be her new home. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think you'll ever fully forgive me for what I did? I thought about the question, about the difference between forgiveness and trust, between love and enabling. Emma, I've already forgiven you. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't matter. It means choosing not to let your actions define how I feel about myself or how I live my life. What about trusting me again? Trust is something you'll have to earn back through your actions, not your words. It will take time, and it will require you to be consistently honest and responsible. I understand. And Mom, thank you for giving me this chance. I'm not giving you a chance, Emma. You're giving yourself a chance. I'm just choosing not to stand in your way. Over the following months, I watched Emma work to rebuild her life with the same determination I'd applied to rebuilding mine. She found a job at a nonprofit organization that helped people with financial literacy, using her education and experience to help others avoid the mistakes she'd made. She attended regular counseling sessions and joined a support group for people recovering from manipulative relationships. Most importantly, she maintained the boundaries we'd established, never asking for money or special favors, never trying to manipulate my emotions or guilt me into providing more support than I was comfortable giving. Our relationship slowly evolved into something neither of us had expected, a friendship between two adults who had survived trauma together and chosen to heal rather than remain wounded. "Mom, I've been thinking about that night when I called you a burden," Emma said one afternoon as we worked together in my garden, planting bulbs for spring flowers we would both be here to see bloom. "What about it?" "I realize now that I was the one who was burdened. I was carrying the weight of lying to you, stealing from you, pretending to be someone I wasn't. That burden was so heavy that I couldn't see how light and free your love actually was." I stopped digging and looked at my daughter, this woman who had hurt me so deeply, but who was working so hard to become someone worthy of forgiveness. "The real burden," I said, "was thinking that love had to be earned through perfection instead of offered freely despite imperfection. And now? Now I love you because I choose to, not because I have to. And you love me the same way. That's not a burden for either of us. That's a gift." As we finished planting and cleaning up our gardening tools, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. Emma had called me a burden and then given me a real burden. The burden of learning to love with wisdom instead of blindness, to support without enabling, to forgive without forgetting. But in carrying that burden, I had discovered strengths I never knew I possessed and built a life more authentic than any I'd lived before. I had learned that being needed wasn't the same as being loved, that sacrifice wasn't the same as support, that family wasn't defined by obligation but by choice. The woman Emma had called a burden had disappeared, replaced by someone who understood her own worth and refused to accept treatment that diminished it. The daughter who had stolen from me had also disappeared, replaced by someone who earned her place in my life through consistent respect and honesty. We were both different people now, shaped by the same traumatic events, but transformed in ways that made us stronger individually and better together. The burden Emma had given me had become the foundation for building something new, something that honored both our past pain and our future possibilities. As the sun set over my Seattle garden, I realized that sometimes the heaviest burdens carry, within them, the seeds of the greatest transformations. Emma had given me a burden that nearly broke me. But in refusing to be broken, I had discovered who I really was beneath all the roles I'd played for others. And that discovery, painful as the journey had been, was worth more than anything I'd lost along the way. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.